Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I'm Patricia and I'm here with two amazing special guests who just so happen to be British. We have my friend and co-host of the Arun Mehta Show. We have Arun Mehta. Welcome back.
Hey everybody, how are you getting on?
And of course, we have somebody who hasn't been on our podcast in a while. Every time that we discuss about everything Sonic the Hedgehog, he's there. You may know him for his stuff on the Guardian comic book and in Sonica. We have Tom. Welcome back, Tom.
Hey, guys.
So, so today we're going to be discussing about the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis for all you Americans. This year will be the 30th anniversary of the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis when it first debuted in Japan in October. But I'm going to be saving my slot for October because it's Halloween and I want to do something special there. So why not? Let's do it a little bit early. So, right before we discuss about the Sega Mega Drive, Genesis, whatever, I'd like to know your earliest memories of it. So, Aaron, what about you?
Well, my earliest memory of it was, we were a Nintendo household. You know, I'll just get out of the way. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm some massive Sega buff because, in our household, we had a Game Boy Color and we had a Super Nintendo, and that's basically how we started out. And then we came across the Sega Mega Drive when my cousins went from down south and went over to the United States, and they couldn't obviously take the Sega Mega Drive with them because they basically just wouldn't. They just didn't think it would work in the United States for obvious reasons because they down here in the UK we use PAL technology for TVs, and over in America it's NTSC. So we ended up with the Mega Drive, and we ended up with a collection of games. One of them was, I don't know if anyone remembers the Mega Game 6, where it came with like Super Hang-On, Streets of Rage. It came with various other games. World Cup Battalion 90, which I did a Let's Play of. with my Preston North End scarf on. And also we got Marco's Magic Soccer Ball, which was like a very obscure kind of game. And it came with a nice collection of games. So that was my earliest thing. So the Sega Mega Drive, I think, was more adored, I think, by my sisters more than it was adored by myself. And I think the only game I kind of played on it really was either Sonic the Hedgehog 3 at the time. But then my friends came over to my house and they saw the Mega Drive and they thought it was like really cool to look at. So and I said at the time before I had the any more controllers for my Super Nintendo at the time, so I only had the one. So because we had two controllers for the Sega Mega Drive, obviously that would be the thing that we would then start playing. So Streets of Rage was definitely one of the games we played a lot. So Golden Axe was definitely one that got a lot of time. And that was pretty much our memories really of the Sega Mega Drive.
All right. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you.
And what about your memories of the Sega Mega Drive?
My memories of the Sega Mega Drive, this is going to sound a bit weird, but I remember my dad at the time managed to get a second-hand Mega Drive. It didn't came in the box. I remember the day it turned up at the house. It literally turned up in like a black bin bag sort of thing, open up and went, well, this is for you can have it. And basically it was the Sega Mega Drive. And I don't know how he managed to do it, but he also managed to get a Sega Master System as well on top of it, and it was that one that had the built-in Alex the Kid one on it. But I played the Sega Mega Drive more, from what I remember from my memory. The first game I ever got to play on it was Sonic the Hedgehog, the first one. That's probably the reason why I've loved Sonic so much. It was the first video game I was ever introduced properly was Sonic the Hedgehog, and it came with some other variant as well. It came with, back in the day with the Mega Drive, they used to do this free pack collection sort of thing, so you had like 3 games onto one cartridge. One of them was the one I had Golden Axe, the first Street of Rage, and I think it was like the Revenge of Shinobi, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, yeah.
That was the other game on my Xbox.
So I remember having that, and I played it a lot. Another game I played a lot on it, which I loved, was Lemons. But I remember back in the day, I remember this really old commercial that they always played on TV globally, and the way it was like 2 TVs set up with 2 consoles linked up to it. One of them was the Super Nintendo, and the other one was the Sega Mega Drive, and basically they played both games back to back next to each other and see which one was more appealing. And the Sonic one looked more appealing because it was a lot more quicker, faster pace and stuff like that. And I think why the Mega Drive did so well here in the UK, I think it was marketed a lot better within Europe than it was the Nintendo system, because the Nintendo system was extremely overpriced here in the UK from what I remember, and it was very hard to get the games for it. But I remember for the Nintendo, if you want to buy a game for it, they originally sold it in a pharmaceutical shop, Boots, back in the day. And Mega Drive games actually was a lot more payable because they actually had a better marketing scheme with them and trying to sell them out and stuff like that. And yeah, that was my memory of the Mega Drive back in the day. So many hours wasted and forcing my brother to be Tails in the game.
I wouldn't call them hours wasted, I think we definitely had a massive amount of enjoyment out of them. I think.
Good, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the one thing I would say about the marketing is, they made the Sega Mega Drive look so awesome in those, and we remember the infamous, Sega does what Nintendo don't. Commercials that used to come out. If only we knew, if we were the massive nerds, I think at the time, because those adverts, I think, I definitely agree with you, Tom. Sega had far more slick advertising campaign. They had far more to offer to people because it was kind of do you remember when the WWF at the time had Mike Tyson?
Yes.
Backing their Attitude Era, and celebrities backing your products were massively the rage, definitely at that time. And so, what bigger celebrity could you have backing your console than the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson?
Well, that is very, very true, and I think Sega had a bigger presence here because when you look at the history of Sega advertising stuff in the UK, I remember they were the sponsors for the Arsenal Football Club for a little while, and also as well, the biggest one I can think off the top of my head is the Trocadero up in central London, which was this giant 6-floor arcade indoor theme park that was was essentially run by Sega and co-run by Pepsi back in the day, and it had Sonic merchandising, Mega Drive merchandise everywhere, and this opened up back in like the mid-90s, if I'm not mistaken, so near towards the end of the Mega Drive era. But you've got to realise that Mega Drive must have been that popular to get a sixth-floor arcade indoor theme park in the UK back in the day, and the same in Australia as well with Sega World Sydney.
Yeah, how amazing is that? Like, Sega went from sponsoring teams like Arsenal, on their team. I think the last sponsorship deal I think they probably had was the Football Manager deal they had with AFC Wimbledon.
Yes, they did. They're still making those games, or not mistaken, the Football Manager games. So,
yeah. And I don't know, like for me, I mean, we're going away from Mega Drive, but just quickly on that, I would say Football Manager 2011 was probably my favourite out of a lot of them. Really, the new ones that really appeal to me. Yeah. But I mean, in regards to go back to what I was saying about the Mega Drive, and if only we knew how, if we were like geeky enough and like nerdy enough to kind of like understand what was under the hood, because when you look at the Sega Mega Drive technology-wise, it had a far more superior processor than the Super Nintendo, but as a cost-cutting measure, they basically didn't apply any more, technology to any of the other bits, such as like, the sound card, the music card, the cartridges were also limited in what they could do, and on top of that as well, I think Sega didn't invest in a lockout chip, I don't think, so you could play parody games in them.
Yeah, that was the really good advantage over Nintendo, was that they didn't really have a lockout feature, like you said. You can easily get the cartridges, put them in, and then away you go. They work quite universally, and I think the other thing with the Mega Drive as well, that it had over the Nintendo, and they were very, very cleverly how they advertised this, was they said blast processing back in the day, and that was the term, the cool term of saying our console runs faster than the Nintendo did. Yeah. process power wise, from what I remember.
Yeah, but I think I'm really surprised that if you remember what happened with the whole, obviously they had Michael Jackson backing this thing. They had the Moonwalker game, and they had that. But then they ran into, I thought it would have been quite a bit of a PR disaster for them, because if you remember, he was making the music for the next Sonic the Hedgehog game, which was Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and he wrote a load of good music for it apparently, and it's still locked up to this day. If we'll ever see the light of day of it again, I don't know. It's still tucked up in the Michael Jackson estate, from what I'm aware. Yeah. But he did all this, and then when he heard it for the first time coming out of the Sega Mega Drive, he was appalled by it, and he basically turned around and said, "I do not want my name associated with this game." And so it's been. There was this big mystery over Sonic the Hedgehog 3 until his death, and then they finally announced that he was the guy who wrote the music for it. So
yeah. I mean, because he was going through the court case at the time for him being charged as a sex offender at the time as well, and I think that's one of the reasons why the game got pulled, because I've researched a lot into this whole Michael Jackson thing with Sonic 3, and they pulled the music, didn't pulled his name from the music because they didn't want representation of what's going on in the media him at the time. Apparently, a lot of big people that he was sponsored with dropped him, like I think Nike dropped him, and I think Disney also dropped him as well, because he was advertising some theme park ride back in the day in the 90s.
Yeah, he was, and on top of that as well, I think, was it around about the time when the Moonwalker film actually came out? I can't remember if it was or not.
I think the Moonwalker film came out like during the 80s. Yeah, like during his allegations, it would have been like in the early 90s.
Oh, okay then.
But then again, so Michael Jackson's always had a big relationship with Sega. Again, you just have to go back and track down for the history of Michael Jackson through Sega. The other ones I can remember, this going away from the Mega Drive, but Space Channel 5, he made a cameo appearance in the second channel, Space Channel 5 game, when they actually made a 3D version of himself in the game, from what I remember. Mm-hmm. So they got the rights to use his likeness.
I mean, Michael Jackson aside, I mean, they had deals with everybody. I mean, the FIFA games are also on Sega Mega Drive as well, and they actually had the licenses, I think, to use like the real names of the players. I don't think international soccer on Super Nintendo had that. I don't think.
Yeah. So. The annoying thing is, I'm trying to remember which games that they said that he had some hand in, but I think the only one that comes to mind is the Carnival Night Zone theme and Ice Cap Zone sound very, very similar to Michael Jackson music. The one that really does sound like a Michael Jackson song is the end credit sequence in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. At the very, very end credit, got a lot of his signature ooh, like you go, remember you just go woo sort of thing. You got a lot of signature woos in it and stuff like that, and a lot of dun, 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 sort of thing. It sounds very much like a Michael Jackson song. The end credits.
I think he did like the mini bosses as well. I think
yes.
they definitely. if they're not Michael, if they didn't have Michael Jackson's hands on them, I don't know what did.
Yeah. It's one of these weird things that Sega back in the day when the Mega Drive was out, they were on top of the world. But I think along the way they let some stupid stuff happen to them, like trying to extend the lifespan of the Mega Drive, which was a huge problem for them.
I think they also as well. If you remember, obviously, are you referring to the Sega CD?
Yeah, that was the first misstep, I would say.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, I think they came up with a Sega CD because Nintendo, I think at the same time, was also in talks with both Philips and and then Sony about producing a CD-based add-on. So I think it was probably, I could be wrong, but if they probably looked at Nintendo and thought, oh, okay, then this is probably going to be the next big ticket.
That's one of the reasons why Nintendo took so long to go CD-based, because their dealership with Sony and Philips was so bad. That's the reason why the N64 stayed on cartridges, because they were afraid of the CD-based format, because they had such bad dealings with Sony and also with Philips. And Sega took that plunge. Give them credit. They did try, and it kind of worked, but really didn't, because the price tag was ridiculous. The portable system... It wasn't that well I think it was marketed well, but it wasn't explained that well, and the games that were produced for it were diabolical. The only two good games I can think of with the Sega CD back in the day was Sonic CD and Snatcher, which was created by the creator of Metal Gear Solid.
Kojima, yeah.
Yeah, Kojima, yeah, that's it.
I think the worst game of all time, I think, on that console, I think, is probably Sewer Shark.
Oh, God, that came free with it when you bought the Sega CD as well. So when you bought it, that was the first game, your first impression of the Sega CD, and I think that probably was a bad mishap on their.
Imagine bugging your parents for it for ages, and then finally bringing it home, putting in Sewer Shark, and then just sitting there like, what the fuck have I done?
And then, the bit rate was terrible, and I think it was ahead of its time, and I think the Master System didn't have the processing power or the graphics at the time to really take full advantage of that system. I think that was the big downfall.
The chipset, because you could, obviously it's another generation, but when the PlayStation came out, it took full advantage of the CD technology. It had, it basically had Sony got it right. Where Sega got it badly wrong, I think, with CD technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, as everybody remembers about the Sega Saturn, that console was not supposed to have 3D graphics. At the best, it could do 2.5D, but it wasn't powerful to compete against Sony's PlayStation.
No.
Yeah.
The one thing I was quite surprised at, I don't know if they could potentially do that, but you remember the Super Nintendo had in their cartridges they had the FX chip, and so that was bringing games like Star Fox in, and I don't know if Sega tried to do that with their Mega Drive, where they tried to put in extra chip sets into their actual cartridges. Obviously, it was more expensive, but obviously I don't know. Did they ever try that?
They tried that with the 32X, if I wasn't mistaken, because there was a few games that tried this 3D look-like sort of thing with the XF thing. That's the reason why I think they made the 32X, was because of that thing. Because when you go and play something like Knuckle Chaotix, it has this 2.5D effect sort of thing when you go through the special stages, and it all had these 3D polygons and stuff like that. I think that's how they tried to do it, because they realised that their Mega Drive cartridges didn't have those chips in it, and it was too late trying to make it compatible with it, otherwise they had to release a whole new console. So they built this mushroom-shaped console that you shoved into the Mega Drive, and it sold horribly, and it was extremely overpriced. And I think it came out 2 years just before the Saturn did, and you're just like, why should I buy this?
On top of that as well, imagine owning every peripheral for the Sega Mega Drive. And so the Sega CD, lumped onto underneath the thing, on its port underneath. And then you've got, in its tray, and then you've got this 32X on top of this thing. And, it's not even aesthetically presentable.
Yeah, and the thing is, what a lot of people don't realise that the Sega CD and the 32X also had their own power unit as well, so that free power unit that you had to plug in as well. There's a great video the Angry Video Game Nerd did back in the day when he actually showed off these accessory to the Mega Drive and how bad it was trying to put the setup on, and it summed it up so perfectly. If anyone wants to see how the setup was so bad, you would just think to yourself, who was the designer for this and he thought this was acceptable for retail use?
Yeah, well, thankfully I only own the Mega Drive. I still own the one I originally got to this day. But even the power cable for that, you have this massive box that you have to plug into it.
Yeah.
I've got one of those 12 stack power extenders on there, and the one thing I have to be careful with, I have to plug it at the very bottom of the stack, because if I plug it at the top, the whole thing just falls over.
Yeah, because that was the same problem with they used the exact same plug sockets for the Sega CD and for the 32X. So imagine trying to have 3 of those in one power strip.
I'd have to get another power strip just to plug them in exclusively. It'd be ridiculous.
Yeah, that's what I mean. For a design standpoint, that was so badly done. And the annoying thing is that the Mega Drive back in the day was a very appealing console. It was like the edgy console. It was the cool console. It had a lot of pop culture here in the UK. I'm not so sure. It was really big. I know outside of, I want to say America, the Sega CD and the Mega Drive was huge everywhere. I'm not so sure about America. I think the Nintendo did slightly better there.
Well, there was a huge competition back then.
Yeah.
Around in America, it was a huge competition. You see, you had the younger kids and the slightly older teens would be gearing towards Nintendo because, for a lot of people, they grew up with Nintendo. And, they had, for a lot of people, the NES was their very first console. And they want to jump into the 16-bit and play off all the continuations of the games that they knew from the 8-bits, like your Marios, your Zeldas, your Mega Mans, your Metroids, etc. And then maybe for the older kids, they're thinking, man, screw those games. This is the 90s. We're going all edgy, and we're going to be all, to the extreme, son. So they thought that the Sega Genesis was more for the hardcore audience because it had more sports games and racing games and all these games that, were basically leading more towards violence. Like, we can talk about the whole Mortal Kombat fiasco.
Oh god, yeah, Sega got in a lot of problem because of that. It actually was quite a few of their games that actually got. I did a documentary back quite a few years ago now. It was talk about it was called "What's the Problem with Video Game?" It was looking at the controversy in video games, and in it we had to talk about the foundation, the SRB rating system, and a couple of the games that were showed off were actually Sega exclusive games, and the version they used was Mortal Kombat, like you just mentioned, Night Trap, and a few other games that were used for examples for that.
Oh god, Night Trap is the reason why we got the fucking rating system.
Yeah, it was one of the games, yeah, and Mortal Kombat was as well. Funny enough, the Night Trap was a Sega CD exclusive game.
No, because the CD just sucks. Like even with Night Trap, it basically got everyone angry over nothing.
Is it terrible that I own a copy of Night Trap on the PlayStation 4?
That's amazing, Tom.
If you go on my Twitter, I think I uploaded a picture of it. I think, Patricia, you saw it as well.
Yes, I did see that, and I was like, good for you, Tom. That's amazing. How many people can say that they have Night Trap for the PlayStation 4?
I'm not going to lie, it looks really good and sounds really good.
Nice.
It's one of those games that actually looks better and plays better on modern hardware than it did on back in the day on really old hardware.
Yeah, which is kind of ironic because everybody was complaining about everybody's complaining about remasters and about how they ruined the games. So yeah, I guess this is one of the very few exceptions in which is actually an improvement.
Yeah.
I'm just looking right now at some of the because Sega obviously made some of the the classic Sega Genesis games. like Sonic the Hedgehog, and Duel Master, and some of the greats. Virtua Fighter 2 obviously another one, which was on the 32X. And but so you look at one thing that I noticed when I'm looking through the entirety of games. What's the one thing that makes a console successful in your opinion?
I think that the one thing that I think is really successful for a game console is the variety of games. Like, what would be a big standout compared to what the competition has? I mean, if it's multi-platform, then I can accept it, but the exclusive games is what really makes it stick out for me. If a game really intrigues me, then yeah, I'm gonna go dedicate a good chunk of my money and go get it. Or in my case, when I first got my Sega Genesis, it was actually a hand-me-down from my older cousin because she used it to buy a PlayStation. So...
Yeah. Let me read out some of the third-party developers that were, helping out the Sega Mega Drive. I mean,
obviously the first one you're going to say is EA because they were responsible for all the sports games.
Oh, absolutely. But you have companies like Capcom, Codemasters, Bullfrog Productions. You have Namco also developing games for it. You had Infogrames, who are pretty big. Konami, who are like the gaming giant. And you even have Microprose as well, which some people are a bit hit and miss with Microprose, but I like Microprose. So I like Transport Tycoon. So that's the reason I like them. And they just they had a huge support from third-party developers, and that to me just kind of set in stone the Sega Genesis and why we're talking about it today.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, some of the things, even with today, Nintendo's main problems is that they don't utilize their third-party developers to its full max.
Yeah, that was a huge problem with the Nintendo today, I would say. And I think with Sega, towards the end of their console lifespan and stuff like that, I think they kind of lost a lot of support from their third-party developers. I think this is the thing that a lot of modern companies need to realise now. You need to be on good terms with your third-party developments. If you're not going to get that many games out the front door.
Absolutely. And do you remember when ID Software decided to port Doom onto consoles?
Oh, God, yeah. That was...
And they weren't very happy with the idea that, Doom was toned down to the way it was.
I can't remember what it was, but I think it was Guru Larry actually did a video about the whole Doom thing, how much of a fiasco it was, a nightmare porting over the console, because apparently the coding was so bad in made in those games, the programmers had a nightmare porting over. That's the reason why some versions of the game didn't have the soundtrack in it, because they just couldn't get them coded properly into them for the release dates.
Yeah, which is why the the Atari Jaguar version has no music.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I'm just going through some of Sega's main staple games that were on the Mega Drive back in the day, and Sega always doing these mega collection packs that you can buy in every single console.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have all these different versions of the game. I think some of the standout ones, apart from Sonic, they actually gain a lot of notoriety. I remember back in the day, there was an article in Nintendo, in the official Nintendo magazine here in the UK, and they had a questionnaire in it saying which character would you like to see return from the Sega old franchise stuff, and the one that came number one was Knights, but there's one that came second, which was a household staple back in the day for Mega Drive, was Streets of Rage. I think that's huge. That was a huge game back in the day, I remember.
They were planning a revival of Streets of Rage many years ago, and then it got shelved, which I was very sad to hit.
And then there was that fan-made game that was supposed to be being made, and then suddenly Sega pulled the plug on it for some reason. I don't know why.
I guess they didn't want it to, they thought that, you're dealing with our property, you can't do that. Trust me, Nintendo has done this before. That's how we, that's how they got rid of another Metroid 2 remake and Pokemon, the remake of Pokemon that was coming out around the same time, in which they pulled the plug on that. And then there was a remastered Super Mario 64 or an Ocarina of Time. Same thing happened.
Well, that's what I mean. Sega are normally quite chilled with people doing fan-made version of the game. Again, look at all the different versions of Sonic ROM hacks and out there and fan-made games and stuff like that. They're normally quite good. I don't know why they were so uptight about Streets of Rage. I don't know. I think there's something to do with the licensing for Streets of Rage. I think that's probably the reason why it got pulled. Another game series which I thought they're more of a cult classic now, but I think back in the day everyone recognised what they were. Toe Jam and L.
Yeah, Toe Jam and Earl is it is a very confusing and frustrating game if you have no idea what to do. But I think that what many people seem to remember it fondly of is that, that cool 90s charm to it. You have basically like Toe Jam and Earl, and they're just crashing to this planet, and they have to go around looking around for stuff so they can put their ship back together. But I think it's the presentation and the appeal of being able to play two players at a time in which that was a novel concept was what kept Toe Jam and Earl still relevant. And then the other sequels of it came out and nobody liked those. And then I think there was like a Kickstarter a couple of years ago trying to bring the series back.
Yeah, I remember that Kickstarter. The creators of the website, the creator of the game, still own the original licensing of Toe Jam and L, so very unheard of back then as well that an original creator kept their original license for a video game character. But yeah, like you said, they were quite popular back in the day. Another one which I think was very essential for the Mega Drive lifespan was the Golden Axe games as well.
Yes,
I would say they were very popular, and the one I remember I had most fondness for was the first one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the first one was a classic.
Yeah.
Going through it, even to this day, when I still go for it, I still feel that, that tension, even though I know what's going to be coming up. And I think it's because, the final boss at the very end, when you find...
I hate that final boss.
I always needed to have a friend play it with me to do that final boss. Because I get up to Death Adder and be like, oh yeah, that's all right. But then you find out that he's been taking orders and it's Death Bringer that you need to kill. And then it's like, oh, great. So yeah, it's becomes quite fair.
And I also love those series of games as well. And another thing that I really do appreciated of the fantasy setting with Golden Axe is that you get to ride on those like dinosaur like creatures, and you get to go into a village that's shaped like a turtle, and you get to fight off skeleton bad guys like Jason and the Argonauts, and And I also love the music. The music is one of my favorite things about Golden Axe.
Yeah. It's just how awesome it would be in a barbarian riding a dragon into a village and just shooting skeletons. Come on. Just that mental image is just amazing.
Yeah.
How crazy is it that in part of the game you're riding on the back of a turtle?
It's so crazy, yeah.
And then on the back of the bird as well at one point, I remember. Yeah, it was just insane, that game, man.
Yeah, it's just a shame that Sega pretty much screwed it up when they brought it into the 360.
Ooh, yeah, I heard about that.
Well, I mean, we played. Me and my friend played this 360 version, and I guess, it was a bit clunky, but it still felt at least playable, and it's still kind of relatable. But yeah, it was. I didn't like how. Did they? As far as I'm aware, they didn't try to add anything new to it.
Not really. It didn't really feel like if it was a Golden Axe game. Sure, you had, like, some cameos from the other characters. Especially when you meet up with the elf guy, and he just sees the girl, and he says, "Buy my balls, girl! I thought you were dead!" And it's like, you have that, and then the guy, I don't think he really says too much at all, and you play as the female character, and it just looks like a generic fantasy game that wouldn't be a major standout, considering that you have a huge legacy like Golden Axe.
Yeah. I think the other thing, another series on it, which is very underrated, but I think it's very, very big in the RPG community, is the Phantasy Star series, from what I remember.
Yeah.
That had a huge following back in the day. And so you got to get a bit iffy about Phantasy Star if you post videos on it on YouTube. I don't know why. That's one of the few games I can think of that they're like, no, we don't want people to talk about it. Why not? Because we said so.
Yeah, Phantasy Star was like the Final Fantasy for Sega. It had like, all the games were standalone. It had a cast of characters, had an anime-like look for the 16-bit era, had a really deep story, very complex combat system. So yeah, Phantasy Star was like huge. And then when it reached over to Phantasy Star Online was when it reached over to the mainstream.
Yeah.
I tell you what, the cartridge itself was crazy. It was one of the 6 mega memories cartridges.
Oh yeah, because they used the save feature, and then that's the reason why it needed it, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And on top of that, you needed how big the game was. You needed a 110-page hint book to get through it.
That game was insane. That game was insane back in the day.
Yeah, it was. And so I'm just looking through some of the other kind of like, I wouldn't say obscure games.
Well, one of my favorite obscure games that does have a bit of a following, but not that much, considering that it is kind of like an action RPG, was Landstalker: The Treasure of King Noel.
Oh yeah. Huh.
I can't say I've heard of that one.
Okay, so basically the game is basically the game is about the main protagonist, and he goes around and he's a treasure hunter, and he grabs this big treasure loot, and then there's this little fairy by the name of Friday who follows him and letting him know that there's the treasure of King Noel that is going to be discovered, and there's a group of kind of like evil bad guys trying to chase after her because she says that she knows where the location is, but she doesn't really know exactly. So she convinces the protagonist, hey, I don't know where it is, but I can kind of help you because I actually know the whereabouts of the land very well. And so he travels around and he goes over to various towns. He does various quests and basically trying to collect clues about the treasures of King Noel, and tries to, see if they can find it right before the bad guys do. And it was kind of like an isometric action RPG because you do have instances in which you like fight monsters with your sword. It's very hard to control because basically you only have 4 directions: left, right, up, down, but it's kind of like moving into a grid. And I do remember playing through that game. I think that was one of the games that I had on the Sega Genesis.
Yeah. And another game which I thought that stood out for it, which was very, very popular back in the day, and I think that was the Shinobi games.
Yeah.
They were essentially their equivalent of the... Is it Gaiden or Gaiden? I can never remember.
It's Gaiden. Yeah, Ninja Gaiden.
Yeah. And it was the equivalent of those sort of game. And I think the third one, which was called The Revenge of Shinobi.
So that's what it's called.
Yeah, The Revenge.
Yeah, that one had a very interesting history to it, because when they brought that out, I kid you not, you had a boss fight with Batman, Spider-Man, and Godzilla as well. So in later versions of that game, when they kept re-releasing it, they had to take these characters out, or they had to put a disclaimer at the very start of it saying, copyright by Marvel, blah, 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 sort of thing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did hear about that.
Why did Shinobi turn up in the Infinity War movie? How amazing would that be?
Oh, that'd be funny.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool. One game I'm looking at here, and I've only played the demo of this, but do you remember Comic Zone?
Yes, I've actually played through it. It's funny because when I was when Tom and I were associated with the PlayStation Let's Play channel alongside with Tristan and Nick, I actually played through like 1/3 of Comic Zone, so I have played it before. Comic Zone is about a comic book artist by the name of Sketch Turner, who draws a comic book called Comic Zone. And so the main bad guy pops out into the comic one night when there's a thunderstorm, because of course it is. And he drags him into the comic, and the comic book protagonist and Sketch have to find a way to defeat the bad guy right before, Sketch dies. And when Sketch dies, then the main antagonist becomes flesh and bone, and he gets to take over the world. So I have played through that, and it's a very unique game. Basically, you're in a comic book, and you go through panels. There's a lot of cool effects in which, like, the pages rip. It's a really awesome game that it doesn't get the credit that it deserves because it came out, like, around the time in which the Sega Genesis was ending its run, so it was kind of, like, put into the backside for a while, and it was, like, almost at the... it pretty much almost, like, bankrupted the company that made it.
Yeah. Released on PC as well, and so I mean, it was. I think if you were really going to buy it for the if you had a PC at the time, this is the thing about Sega Mega Drive as well, which was kind of a flaw with it. If you had you were more likely to have a PC at the time because PCs were relatively cheap. At the time, and also on top of that, they weren't that graphically, demanding at the time. So, you could play games like Golden Axe and play games like Comic Zone on your computer if you wanted to, and you wouldn't have to buy like a whole other console for it. So that was one thing that I think, because I don't know why, because Sega, I believe at the time, was also releasing stuff for the PC. Releasing the games like not just exclusively for the Mega Drive, but also releasing them like on the PC and Amiga computers as well, which I didn't think would make much sense to me really when you want to create something that
I guess that's why when the guys over at id, when they were just starting off, when they were creating the Super Mario Brothers 3 prototype to see if they can have it as PC, Nintendo pretty much said nope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So just looking through some of these other, I say there was another game I wanted to talk about, which I've completely. We talked about Electronic Arts before, and we said that they came up with the majority of the sports games. But there's one sports game which I always found very hilarious, and isn't really that much sporty. It's Road Rash 2.
Yeah, Road Rash.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
But you punch people off motorcycles,
and you get chased by police officers that are trying to hit you off your bike.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you know that they made another game, a spiritual successor called Road Rage last year?
No, I didn't hear about that, actually.
Yeah, good, because apparently, according to various reviews, they said it sucked.
Oh, well, of course it did.
I mean, a fun fact I know about the Sega Mega Drive as well is that for its processing powerful color bit and stuff like that, I knew it wasn't as superior as the Super Nintendo was because Super Nintendo can use brightlight more color, but the one color that the Mega Drive that was really good at rendering is the color purple. Don't know why, but for some weird reason it can render it very, very well. That's the reason why Comic Zone, when you play the start of it, the whole first sequence, like most of the colors in that game is like mostly violet purples and stuff like that. The same with Toy Story game as well. A lot of the colour was vibrant purple, and it was one of these weird consoles that it had problems rendering tons and tons of colour, but purple was the one colour that they use a lot. That's the reason when you go back and watch these games, if you want any colours to stand out in the Mega Drive game, they use a mixture of blue and purples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but going back to Toy Story, it was I don't know, like it was kind of bizarre for them to kind of release Toy Story on Sega Mega Drive because it was I don't know, because you can see that the 3D aspects didn't really translate that very well to the Mega Drive technology, and you compare that to you compare that to Donkey Kong Country that came out. So I think roughly around about the same time, I believe. It was Donkey Kong Country looks far more appealing to the eye than Toy Story did.
Yeah, I think that's because of the XF chip in the Super Nintendo that could translate 3D models into 2D graphics, and they used it for a long time, even going to the N64 with a prime example was, if I'm not mistaken, was Mario Kart off the top of my head. But the Mega Drive just had a very, towards the end of its lifespan, it just had a wavering bunch of games that came out that a lot of people didn't play because you had stuff like the Saturn that came out, you had the PlayStation, so a lot of these games that looked very, very good on the console, a lot of people don't end up playing them because they got new hardware come out and people said, oh yeah, that's the new console, I want to get it. It's the reason why when you look at games towards the end of their lifespan, towards the end of the console lifespan, look so good is because they master it so well and they know the limitations of it and how far they can push it and what corners they can cut in places compared to newer consoles that come out and then people get a headache over and I do have no idea how this works.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it's this is the problem that game consoles come up with again. It's like, technology changes like every 6 months. Yeah. And so you're going to, by the time they've mastered this technology, they have to go back, start all over again and master a whole new technology.
Well, I mean, the one console that no company wanted to master was the Wii U because they were, we are not dealing with that headache of that stupid gamepad. We are not going to be dealing with that headache.
Yeah. For me, it was it was just a massive Nintendo DS. When you look at it.
It was. Oh yeah, definitely. I just think the Genesis had a very good life. I think it had a very good lifespan. It had some really good deal. There's 2 games. I'm surprised I didn't mention this. I think it was like the 3rd best-selling game on the console was Aladdin.
Yes.
That game was huge, and they had a lot of help from Disney to get that game made with the sprites and the character designs and everything like that. That game was insane. There's a great video online. I think it was from the creator of Monkey Island, I want to say. He has his own company, which he's remastering like all these old point-and-click adventure games. He does a video series on them. When he gets his old friends that are video game designers who either retired or still working in the industry, they come in and talk about the games they worked on back in the day. And one of them, they did talk about Aladdin and the Lion King video game and how they had a lot of help from Disney back in the day get these games made. And that's the reason why the Aladdin game looks so good on the Mega Drive, unlike the Capcom version that was on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, well, I will agree that they had they looked like they did a lot of good things, but there's one little question I have about the Lion King. Why the hell did they hide that pink fucking rhino so well that you can't see the rest of the freaking game?
Oh god, that second level was brutal. Well, not fun for the people who were involved in this story, but apparently all the people they hired to do the Aladdin game, it was done by Virgin Media back in the day. It was a co-joint venture from Virgin Media and Sega. Mm-hmm. And all the people they had on the Virgin Media team that was working on the game for Aladdin, they hired some new people to do the Lion King game and said, once they'd finished with the Aladdin game, we're going to send them over to you and then they're going to help you make the game. And all the stuff they learned about making that game, they're going to tell you guys how to do it and they work with you to do it. And they thought, okay, cool. Literally, I think it's literally less than a month before they were meant to go over to help them, they fired every single one of them.
No, that's typical Virgin, that.
Yeah, basically they fired every single one of them, and the people was like, "Oh my god, what are we gonna do?" And he said, "Well, you got a deadline, you got to meet it, so you're gonna have to meet it." And another fun fact about that Lion King game has some cut content from the actual film as well, because Disney had this whole sequence with Simba growing up as an adult. And so what they did in the film, for those who've never seen the film, they had this whole montage. Basically, you're seeing Simba as a little cub and you see little snippets of him, different stages of his age until he becomes a young adult. What they did in the actual film, there's about a good chunk of 20 minutes of film in which you were going to see him growing up as an adult. That's the reason why they cut it out. So they got in contact with Sega and Virgin Media saying, look, you need to cut this content out of the game for the Mega Drive game. They had to go back to them and tell them, no, we cannot cut it out. If you cut it out, you're cutting out nearly over half of our game.
Yeah, one of the most infamous scenes is definitely right before you fight off against Scar and Simba is running around towards this hot molten lava location. And he's fighting off hyenas. Apparently that was supposed to be in the original movie, but instead the final product is, you have that scene in which Simba's running off in the desert with the sand, and then he finally gets to Pride Rock. Apparently that was supposed to be a huge chunk of the movie in which he does go back into, Pride Rock, but there's this long journey with him over running the hyenas and then finally making it into Pride Rock, and then that made it into the game.
Yeah, and now I mean they kept it in the game, but they cut it from the film, and they had to beg to let them keep it in the game back in the day, and that sort of thing. Give them props. I think Sega had a lot of pull in that. Had a lot of pull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another game that I do remember from the Sega Genesis that is also another cult classic that's featured in so many of the, Sega Genesis collectors bunches is Vector Man.
Oh god, the character you play who made out a bunch of balls.
Yes, that's the one.
I
mean, if you take a look at the plot of Vector Man, it's essentially like a proto Wall-E.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
I was gonna say, Blue Sky Software had quite a sizable amount of games, I believe, on the Sega Genesis. So they definitely left their stuff. They even made the Ren and Stimpy game.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. Also, as well, fun fact about the Mega Drive, they had a Sega Mega Modem which you can link up to the internet to go on their Sega Mega Drive services and download games off from back in the day. They sold these through Blockbuster Videos.
Yeah, this was like many years even before the concept of like Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network and even the Wii Shop was even popular.
Yeah, they were like building like consoles. So building cartridges with like modem ports in them, and people were like taking a look at them like, what the hell is this?
Yeah,
and so,
they had tons of games going through their system as well. One of them is being Alien Soldier. I remember there was a certain port of Sonic and Knuckles, and the list goes on, and that's how.
There was also Wily Wars for Mega Man. They remastered remastered the first 3 Mega Man games, and then they had Wily Wars, in which you got to fight off against like 3 robot masters that were never featured in any other Mega Man game since, and you had the option of playing and customizing every single item and weapon from the first 3 Mega Man games.
I know, that's insane.
Yeah, so essentially you can just OP yourself. You can have the rolling cutter, you can have Metal Man's Metal Blade, you can have Shadow Man's Shadow Ninja throwing star, you can have the Rush Jet, you can have the Magnet Beam, you can have everything into that game, and that would be like amazing. It's just a shame that most people who, haven't played it. I mean, it was exclusive, like, on the Sega Channel, and it was, like, released in, like, Europe and Japan, but, yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, they've never played it before.
Yeah. Blue Sky also made Ariel's Little Mermaid, so they also got a Disney game under their belt, alongside Virgin and...
Yeah, Virgin did a lot of Disney games. Another one they did was also The Jungle Book, which I also did a Let's Play of with the PlayStation Let's Play channel.
I remember that. That was also a Mega Drive game.
Yes, that was a Mega Drive game. Even that was also one of the first games that I ever played as well for the Sega Genesis, because my cousin also had a hand-me-down of that. And speaking of a Sega CD game, one of the first that I owned was the Spider-Man vs. Kingpin game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I remember
that game was hard.
Yeah, that game was really hard and really difficult. Basically, for those who don't know, it's essentially that Kingpin set up a bomb somewhere in New York City, and you only have 24 hours to find it, and you play as Spider-Man, and you have to, like, look all over the city for it, and it's difficult. It's really hard, because you have to do a lot of exploration. You have no idea where you're supposed to go. They have a map, but it's very vague, and it's difficult. Especially, you die very easily in that game.
Yeah.
But I think one of the funniest things that I did remember is that I looked back on the game via YouTube, and apparently I never got to this part. When you get a power up, the sound effect is like if you were a fairy granting a wish. It has like that sprinkling sound effect. It's like ding. It's like, are you kidding me? You're getting a power up and this is the sound effect? It's so dumb.
Yeah, there was some weird. On top of that as well, you got to keep in mind the Sega Mega Drive was limited in what it could do sound-wise, because have you seen? Do you see the AVGN video where he compared the soundtrack to Doom on the Sega Drive?
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, their sound card was terrible.
Yeah, the difference was night and day. And it's even amazing that we could even praise music, on games, given that the technology on it was so limited.
Yeah, I mean, the Sega CD, the Sega Mega Drive, it has had a very influential history to it. Again, I know most recently they just released the Sega Genesis flashback collection. So pretty much they've done their own version of the mini Super Nintendo and NES.
Yes.
Thing. They just released it. It got like 85 games on it, and oh my god, the list of games on it are insane. It's like it got like every game that you want to be on there, plus more games than you wouldn't expect to be on there, because they actually had to get some licensing deals with some people. Like they actually got in contact with NetherRealm Studios to have Mortal Kombat 2 and 3 onto the collection as well.
Wow. And not the original Mortal Kombat, which pretty much just basically made them infamous to, one of the reasons why to pick up a Sega Genesis.
Oh, yeah.
Well, anyway, but nonetheless, it's fine. But, I remember, I think that came out even before the NES Classic, right?
Yes, it did. Yes.
And it's kind of hilarious because once the NES Classic came along, the Sega, Mini Classic just pretty much just went into the wayside until they re-released it, and then they added in more games, and they were like, hey, we exist, play us. But yeah, I mean, I remember there's that. There was also the Atari flashback console in which they had a lot of their games. They even have one for, believe it or not, they even have one for the ColecoVision.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. We had a very popular console here in the UK back in the day. I've never really played it. This is more my fiance's dad played it more. It was called the ZX Spectrum.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the ZX Spectrum.
Yeah, and they recently re-released it. Guru done a great video on the failed bust of them trying to get it made, but they officially finally got it released and properly and stuff like that. And I've seen it sold in game shops, and this is the thing that makes me laugh so much about seeing this ZX Spectrum. On top of the box, they actually printed on top of it, say, official licensed product that is sponsored by the copyright holder of the ZX Spectrum. Because they did release a version of the ZX Spectrum which went through a massive lawsuit problem, and they couldn't get the rights for all the games, and then all the games got discontinued from the console within within a year or something like that. It was a complete nightmare. So they actually had to put on the box an official licensed product of ZX Spectrum, and I'm like, oh my god, that's terrible, but somewhat funny at the same time. Mm-hmm. If you know about the history of it.
Yeah. One thing we'd like to know, actually, while I'm talking about the ZX Spectrum, is that did you know that Rick Dickinson, the guy who designed the console, passed away recently?
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. I remember reading something about that. That actually made rounds in the UK news scene because of how big that console was here in the UK.
Yeah. And so, thoughts and prayers to his family, and thank you for giving us, a wonderful console for us to live with. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that again, a lot of these old classic consoles, especially the Sega Mega Drive, all getting these re-releases now in like these mini versions of them. So if you plug them in TV and where you go, you've got a bunch of games to play. And I think with kids who are growing up now that don't really heard about people talking about these consoles and talking about these old school gaming things, I think there's probably the best way to go around now actually playing some of these old school games. And I think it's wonderful to see that younger generations are now getting the chance to play games from our generation now,
Yeah. You tell you what, there's I don't know if you ever came across this, but did you know actually there was like third-party models of the Sega Genesis?
Yes, there was. And also, again, that's what I mean. Sega are very, very laid back about this sort of stuff, and this was why I'm quite surprised they pulled fan-made games off online and stuff like that. But yeah, I never understood that. Sega got a very weird relationship with people who want to make games for them, or make fan version games, or other products within their name.
I think that, despite a few other things, Sega is kind of still lax with, letting the fans do what they want so they can be able to help spread out the knowledge of their games. I mean, especially with Sonic, you have, Sonic Mania, which was basically done by a bunch of fans who were doing Sonic ROM hack games. And then, of course, Sonic Forces, in which, you get to create your own OC character. Look, I have a hedgehog who is light blue, and he has sneakers and a hat. Original character, do not steal, in an official Sonic the Hedgehog game.
Yeah. Again, the most famous example I can think of that a fan game that turned into original property was Freedom Planet, off the top of my head. That originally was meant to be a Sonic game, but the original creator of it, basically, he said he was getting sick and tired of basing off something else and limitations of it, so he changed it in his own IP and recruited an artist from DeviantArt, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember her name, but she redesigned all the characters for it, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
So, do you want me to tell you I'm looking at it right now. There is a device which plays Sega Genesis games and Sega CD games, and it is the weirdest thing I'm currently looking at right now. It is the Pioneer CLD A100, and not only does it play Sega Genesis games and Sega CD games, it plays CDs and laser discs.
What? That thing must be gigantic.
It's a pretty, in comparison to the controller, it's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
I would say it probably rivals the Philips CDI.
Yeah, I'm going to sound extremely nerdy here, but I recently brought Sonic Mania vinyl edition not so long ago, and I was like, oh yeah, vinyl, that's not going to be a problem to store, and then the vinyl turned up in the post, and I'm like, oh crap, this is going to be a problem to store. I've got no idea where I'm going to put this thing. So imagine having a video game console, because the Laserdisc was the same size as vinyl discs ever. Am I not mistaken, right?
Well, I wanted to buy Doom. You get Doom on vinyl now. Doom 2016. That's on vinyl at the moment, and I really wanted to get that, and then I realised I don't have a record player. So
I mean, vinyl is one of these things that always come in and out of fashion, and I think it's kind of ironic with old video games from like the 8-bit and 16-bit era always do come in and out of fashion, weirdly, and a lot of indie developers get influenced by these really old games, and we're starting to see that now with a lot of modern games that are taking influences from video games from this era of the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, because these people who are designing games now grew up during that era and played these games on these video game consoles, and it really does translate to it. When you look at it, you're like, wow, okay.
Yeah, I just think this is the thing. I always think that video gaming now, and I compare it also to the animation industry as well. But the fact that you have a generation of people who have grown up with probably like the best of the best, and are inspired by what's come before. That's why I always say that I have quite high hopes for the future of animation and video games and things like that, because you're dealing with a generation of people who grew up with this, including us.
Yeah, exactly. Like the people who are creating shows now, like Adventure Time and Steven Universe and Craig of the Creek and The Loud House, there were people who grew up with shows such as Ren and Stimpy and Animaniacs and a whole bunch of other shows. So imagine them being influenced with creating shows of today, and then kids of the future who are watching shows that are going on right now will be able to create even better shows. I mean, the same thing could be said about games. I mean, people who grew up with, like, Super Mario World or Sonic the Hedgehog are able to create games like A Hat in Time or Freedom Planet. So it makes you really excited to know about, okay, what's going to happen next.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
can I ask you guys? Have you ever seen the Sega Nomad?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I've never. Well, I'm looking at the D-pad right now, and it looks like he looks very.
Yeah, basically, it's the Sega Nomad was like, hey, let's do a combination of the Sega Genesis and Sega CD, except make it more expensive than if you were to buy the two of them separately. Brilliant!
Just yeah, like I can imagine like holding the device and then like the way that they've got the D-pad, like you're supposed to put your thumb like right in the middle of it and kind of like move. You kind of like your thumb around. That's really going to wane on your knuckle. Eventually you're going to want to put it down.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And also, if you're playing something like with the Angry Video Game Nerd when he did that video on X-Men, and that's that level in which you're playing the X-Men 2 game, in which you actually have to push the reset button in order for you to go to the next level. And the Sega Nomad doesn't have a reset button, so if you turn it off, you have to turn it off with the on and off switch, and you have to basically do it all over again.
Really?
Yeah, but I mean, the Sega Nomad, I guess it's either that or the Sega Game Gear.
Well, if it would be really obscure, you can look up the Sega Neptune.
Oh, no. No.
That's another bad example of Sega with their marketing and decision making.
There's other weird, Sega Genesis consoles. There's the Wonder Mega as well, which was from it was a JVC model version of a combination of a Sega CD and a Genesis. So
yeah, that one was really weird. It didn't even do very well, to be quite honest. So yeah, that was another failed experiment. I mean, essentially they were just trying to stretch out the Sega Genesis because of the huge competition with the Super Nintendo, and basically they were trying to do the add-on so they can give it more life. But I mean, it is true that it did lasted for 9 years, which that's almost like double the length of an average console, which is about 5. But there's a reason why the Sony PlayStation 2 did much better. You see, number one, the Sony PlayStation 3 started off really horrible with making their prices, extremely expensive. And number two, it had a whole variety of games that people can still play on. And I guess you have to understand this was a different time in which everybody was talking about which has the better graphics. That was like the big thing back then. Which looked the best? I guess it's like if a moviegoer goes, it's like, which one will look better in 3D? I think that when we look back on, games that are trying to be all gimmicky with like graphics and stuff, in the end, it doesn't really matter. The gameplay and the controls and all that stuff is what makes it still hold up.
Yeah, I guess when you look at it that way, I guess you can see why Sega pulled away from Nintendo in quite a significant way, because obviously they had a console with a better processor on than Nintendo did. And if we're going to go on the fact that who has the better graphics, and if no one really cared and were caring more about the games, then you were probably going to look more on how the game was going to process and how fast the game was going to go, and therefore you had that's the reason why Sonic the Hedgehog could run the way that he could, and that's the reason why a lot of games on the Sega Genesis could outperform games that you see on the Sega Super Nintendo. Yeah. So if that was your thing, you definitely were a Sega Mega Drive fan, and if you didn't, mind you, if you were looking for something a bit more pleasing to the eye and looking for something a bit more wholesome, I think you probably were looking at Nintendo at the time.
I mean, I think one of the other weirdest versions of the Sega Mega Drive I've ever seen, I've actually seen it at a history of video game event here in the United Kingdom, when they go around and they do this trade show sort of thing, where they showed off all old video games from back in the day and stuff like that. And I remember IBM console PC company made their own version officially with Sega, with Mega Drive. It was like a IBM computer, but you can play your Sega Mega Drive games on it.
I'm
sure a CD drive version.
As well. If you remember, a lot of Alan Sugar's old company, they made the Amstrad Mega PC, and that was also Mega Drive compatible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, Sega had a really good relationship with PC manufacturers.
Yeah, it wasn't just that. Everyone jumped in, didn't they? They wanted their devices to play Sega Mega Drive games.
Yeah.
Day.
and Nintendo were very, very stingy about letting people have part of the pie. They said, no, we want to keep the whole pie, but no, we want to make money with you. No, you can't have it though. It's ours.
Yeah, it makes me wonder in the future if Sega, because I think didn't Sega become quite kind of narrow in themselves, because
they have.
Yeah, you didn't really see after Sega Saturn, it was just the Sega Saturn. You didn't see any other any other built-in features after that, and definitely with the Dreamcast. I mean, you didn't see any other
Dreamcast was a promising thing for them, but because they did so many blunders before the Sega Dreamcast, it all just caught up with them in the end and almost had to file for bankruptcy. And the Dreamcast was a great console on paper. It just came out at the wrong time, the wrong circumstances, and I think the biggest killer for it was that it didn't have a DVD drive. If it had a DVD drive, I guarantee you that Sega Dreamcast would have lasted for a lot longer than it did, sadly. I actually still got a Sega Dreamcast upstairs, and I actually own a Sonic Adventure 2 beta disc. So it was like the original tech demo disc of like the first level of City Escape, and Sonic's in the tech demo. He doesn't have his grind shoes yet at all, because that was only added in like a few months just before the game was released. That partnership with the grind shoes.
I have a friend who owns a copy of Half-Life Blue Shift. That was supposed to go on to, it was supposed to be developed for the Dreamcast, but then when the Dreamcast obviously ended, Half-Life Blue Shift never happened on Dreamcast. So, that would have been a thing. So, here's the thing, is like, you never would have foreseen any of that. If you were looking from the premise of the Sega Genesis you were like thinking, oh my god, Sega is going to be with us for the rest of our lives. We're going to be bringing up our kids on Sega consoles.
Oh yeah.
At this point. Yeah, you never thought that it would go the way that it did, and I think it just goes to show how dominant the console actually was at the time. That it made you think that Sega is at this top of the mountain right now. They are winning. They're winning out wherever they can be, in America, in Europe, even in the Far East at times. It looked like an unbeatable company at that point, and. You were expecting better things going on decades down the line.
And I think just over the years, they just made stupid mistake after stupid mistakes after stupid mistakes, and they just couldn't be accepting of their mistakes and what did they do wrong and what needed to be changed. And I think it was by the time they realised, okay, we need to change, we need to have a plan going forward, and Dreamcast was that plan. They were like, oh god, it's too late, we made too many mistakes and it's all caught up to us in back finances and debts and payments. We're going to have to abandon ship here.
Mm-hmm. Should have milked all that outsourcing of their technology for all it was worth.
Yeah. It's a sad truth.
Yeah, but hey, you never know. Maybe at some point in the future, Sega could make a comeback. Atari made a comeback recently with their new console. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Sega would have something down the line. Maybe that Dreamcast 2. Woo! I don't know.
That's always been rumored, the Dreamcast 2. I don't think it will ever happen now. I think Sega's too deep into the rabbit hole in just being a software development now, and I think they will never go back to being a hardware development again. The closest we're ever going to get to it is those HD mini port systems now.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll say this, Tom. I think we're going to see the Phantom before we see the Sega. See the Sega Dreamcast.
Yeah. Oh God. Bloody Phantom.
Anyway, one thing I'd like to know, we owned the Sega, I think we should start this at the get-go, actually. We owned the Sega Genesis 2 before we owned, any other Sega Genesis console. And one thing you noticed that on the first design that they went with, they decided to put in a headphone jack.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, I saw that. I never understood that.
Well, did you know anyone who used? Yeah, I was going to say, because I saw people with like the first generation of like the Sega Mega Drive, but I never knew anybody who actually used the headphone jack.
The thing I always find funny with it was that the very, very first version, where the white strip is, where the red light is, underneath it, it always say high definition graphics. And by today's standards, I just look at it and went, oh my god, that's hilarious. But back then it was.
Yeah, mind you, I bet there's some. Do you know now you can actually get modded chips for like game consoles, which come with like HDMI ports in them? If you're a soldering expert, you can you can solder the chip boards in. You can actually actually get it to produce HDMI graphics. But I mean obviously it'd be absolutely overkill, I believe, to produce a HDMI circuit board for a Sega Genesis.
I got myself a splitter for the red, white, blue, yellow cord things. The DVS cable plug into a converter to a HDMI cable and plug into a TV, and that's how I can play my Dreamcast, and it runs perfectly fine.
Yeah, and because I just noticed that now. I think somewhere down the line someone's going to be coming out and saying, "Oh, hey, I managed to put a HDMI port in the back of my Sega Genesis," and it's like, for what reason?
They've already done that for Dreamcast. There's this website, can't remember the name of it, but you can actually, I think they're based here in the UK. You can actually ship them your Dreamcast, and they can mod it for you, so they can put like a switch on it to convert it to 170p HDMI output, and also have the correct modded chips so you can play different type of games. And it's very, very bizarre website, but you can send it off, they send it back to you, and you just hit the switch on the back of it. There you go, convert the HD perfectly, crystal clear.
Yeah, but rounding off on the volume control on the first Genesis, I mean, like it has like a phone like a headphone jack you plug into the front of it, and then it has like a volume control actually on the console itself, which I guess you could probably say is reasonable, because you can't, obviously, if it's too loud in the headphones, you have to turn it up and turn it down and stuff. But it was just a very bizarre feature, because I mean, I can't imagine having your headphones on while you got the where you got the TV on. It kind of reminds me of like the remember the Konami laser scope that was for the net. And it had like a voice control module, so you could like voice control the game. And like one of the reasons why, one of the advertising features they put on the box is that you can, while your kid's playing your game, you can have like a conversation in the room or talk on the phone. And it's like, while you're yelling like at the game. So it kind of defeats the purpose of that when you think about it. But
and it's funny that they did that back in the day, and now they're advertising that as a feature in the newer Nintendo console, like the Switch and the Wii U. So, if you want to watch TV, you can just give your kid a headphones, plug it into the little shitty plastically tablet thing, and they can play away on the game while you're watching the football.
Yeah, it's just this. Before we talk about the Nintendo Switch another time, I think I've got plenty of opinions on that. But,
we'll definitely talk about that soon.
Yeah, and then when they move up to the second model, like obviously they took the headphone jack away, and I mean, did they take any other features out of the the first one? I think they just made it smaller. I think they made it smaller, and they made the buttons on it a lot more clearer, because a lot of them were just black and white, and they were not that labeled that well. So they gave them bright red buttons with quite bold white text underneath them, basically saying, "This does this. Press that to do that." you know. Because you could on the original first model, you had like a volume slider, you had a really tiny small reset white button in the corner, you had a headphone jack, you know, all these weird features, and they were very unclear on how they actually worked. Yeah. How did you feel about the turbo buttons that were added later on? I think they were a cool feature. They were ahead of their time, and surprise, surprise, in modern gaming, they were pretty much a standard now to have. Yeah, I mean, I remember. The only turbo button I kind of like used was like, I think it was probably like the middle one for Streets of Rage, where where Axel does like a punch, a back punch for that, and it's like. That was pretty annoying though, because my mate had like one of those turbo buttons, and so when we were playing Streets of Rage, if you wanted to shake off someone in the back, I'd just be grabbed from behind and get thrown and stuff like that, and all he had to do basically was press the turbo button, and you just punch him in the back.
Yeah.
He had more of an advantage over me.
And then there was the Sega Genesis 3, which was even, it was half the size of the previous Genesis consoles, and there was no slot to put in, the the Sega CD, or even like big enough to put in the 32X. That is, if you even wanted one, which no. But yeah, it was much smaller, and the buttons were a lot more thinner. It was like kind of like flattened into the console itself.
Yeah, I think that they knew at that point. It's like, they brought out the Genesis 3 and said, "Don't you dare try and plug a CD or a 32X into this thing." Like, leave it alone. Enjoy the games that you have.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess final words on the Sega Genesis consoles. There's a reason why out of all of the consoles that Sega ever produced, this is definitely like the most famous one. I mean, second into, the second one being the Dreamcast, but the Sega Genesis was like a huge contender back in the 90s with the Super Nintendo, and about like which one was going to be the definitive one. Was it going to be the old school Nintendo, or is it going to be the true Genesis does what Nintendo don't? So yeah, there's a lot of interesting videos on YouTube, and there's a lot of books about the history about this competition. So yeah, there's a book about the 16-bit wars. There's James Rolfe's video on the Sega Genesis versus the Super Nintendo. There's a ton of videos on that. There's obviously the Did You Know Gaming videos on the Sega Genesis where they go more in depth about it. So yeah, if you're interested in doing some more research on it, go check it out. And if you are interested in playing a Sega Genesis, then it's a lot easier now than ever. You can either get one of those compilation games for like either the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, or even on Steam. Then there's the Sega Genesis Mini Classic, where they have all 80 plus games in there. So yeah, it's more accessible than ever.
I'll tell you what, guys, I'm just looking at all the covers for like the Sega Genesis anime games, and I have to say, I think I've just discovered the origins of fan service.
Wow, I can imagine. All right, well, Tom, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on by. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me on to talk about this incredible console.
So, I guess we can start off with plugs and self-promotion. So, Tom, what do you got?
For me, you can always check out my video content on indexsonic on YouTube. Currently, at the moment, the videos I'm uploading on that are called Insonico. They are based on an old Sprite comic back from the early mid-noughties. It's a Sonic fan-based parody comic that goes... The best way I can describe it, imagine Sonic, but in the style of Seinfeld. And it's basically Sonic as a sitcom. Currently at the moment, I'm going through the comic, editing it down, and getting getting voice actors to get involved, do their lines on it, and just having a whale of a time of it. Episode 4 is out at the moment. Episode 5 is currently in the work. I also am the creator/writer for a comic book called Guardian. If you want to read the comic, we're currently going over overhaul at the moment, so we haven't uploaded any pages in quite a while, but the first issue is almost done, and once the first issue is done, we are going to try to get the comic up on Webtoons, when you can read the first issue for free. And we do have a partnership coming up as well with Publisher. I'm not going to mention who, because that's all in the works still. And if you do want to follow that comic on Facebook, just look up Guardian Comic Book.
All right, well, great. And Aaron, I guess there's no introductions about where we can find you at, since we do Pixmix, we do the Arun Mehta Show, but go ahead and plug your stuff anyway.
If you want to check out the Arun Mehta Show, it's facebook.com/Arun Mehta Show. That's ARUNMEHTASHOW. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's twitter.com/Arun Mehta Show. ArunMehta.tumblr.com, and also I'm on Instagram as well over at Arun Mehta Show. So plenty of ways to find me and plenty of ways to listen. I'm on iTunes, Player FM, Stitcher, Podcast Directory, all places where you can find podcasts. And I'm also on YouTube, which is youtube.com/Arun Mehta Show.
That should be it for this episode, guys. Let us know in the comments below about what your earliest memories of the Sega Genesis is. What was your favorite? What were your favorite games? What were your favorite moments? And did Sega do what Nintendo didn't? So thank you so much for listening, everybody. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.
Bye.